President Trump also said that he was a little bothered by his Ukrainian counterpart Zelensky's stance and insisted that both Ukraine and Russia would have to give up territory to each other as part of a potential peace agreement, adding that his meeting with Vladimir Putin would test waters for such a deal.
I'm going to meet with him. We're going to see what the parameters are. I'm then going to call up President Zelensky and the European leaders right after the meeting, yeah. And I'm going to tell them what kind of a deal. I'm not going to make a deal. It's not up to me to make a deal.
Trump said that he would know within minutes if there would be a peace deal between Ukraine and Russia when he meets Putin later this week.
At the end of that meeting, probably in the first 2 minutes, I'll know exactly whether or not a deal can be made. Because that's what I do. I make deals.
Trump also revealed plans to call Zelensky and other European leaders immediately after the talks with the Russian counterpart, fearing that Putin will team up with Trump to force unacceptable compromises. European leaders now plan to speak separately on Wednesday. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz has invited the French, UK and other European leaders and the EU and NATO chiefs for virtual talks. Merz's office even said that a video conference in various rounds of talks would discuss further options to exert pressure on Russia and preparation of possible peace negotiations and related issues of territorial claims as well as security. European Union foreign ministers met in Brussels on Monday with Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha and others who examined imposing a 19th package of sanctions on Russia since the invasion began. European Union Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas said that until Russia agrees to a full and unconditional ceasefire, concessions should not even be discussed. Parallelly, the Ukrainian president has warned against giving in to Putin's demands, highlighting how Russia refuses to stop the killings and therefore must not receive any rewards or benefits. And joining us on the broadcast is Maximilian Hess. He's Central Asia Fellow at Foreign Policy Research Institute, joining us on the broadcast live from London. Mr. Maximilian, appreciate you joining us on WION. First up, do you think the US president has already laid the groundwork for striking a deal within 2 minutes of his meet with his Russian counterpart? In your opinion, will that help in talks or can it impact differently?
President, thank you so much for having me. I don't think President Trump has laid the groundwork for signing a deal within the first 2 minutes, either from his own strategic interests or from those of Ukraine, NATO, Europe, and the wider West. And those are two very different set of interests. It should be made clear. But I think Donald Trump is going to find it very hard to make a deal with Putin on the matters that he cares about or on the matters that Ukraine and the wider West care about.
Yes, Mr. Maximilian, continuation to that same point, talking about the meet that the EU leaders had. It was an emergency meeting that was called on Monday. In fact, they are all set to hold another one virtually, though tomorrow, that is Wednesday. In your view, is there a real chance of Ukraine being sidelined in the talks between Putin and Trump in Alaska?
I think Ukraine and Europe more broadly have been sidelined so far, but that's one of the many reasons, and only one of many, why it will be so difficult for Trump to make a deal. He cannot force a deal on the Ukrainians, who will fight back continued Russian occupation and aggression towards their territory. And Europe, as we have seen repeatedly throughout this conflict, tragically, only really acts when it's backed into a corner. Now, Europe is the largest supplier of financial and military aid to Ukraine, larger than the United States at this point. Of course, it's dependent on buying American weapons for a lot of the key technology that Ukraine needs. But Europe itself has really made a series of strategic blunders in these negotiations by being unwilling to take action to show that it is in the driver's seat with regard to Ukraine and Russia policy. And there's a lot more it could still do.
Yes, Mr. Maximilian, talking about the latest comments that have been coming in from President Zelensky, he's minced absolutely no words in stating that he will never consent to any Russian annexation of Ukrainian territory. But fact of the matter also remains that Zelensky's advisor and Rubio also had preparatory talks. In fact, these talks were held just yesterday. In your view, is there a meeting ground between Russia and Ukraine as well as the US?
I think it would be very difficult to achieve. Vladimir Putin has repeatedly in the past said he doesn't acknowledge the legitimacy of the Ukrainian government, and he would likely require symbolic signs that Ukraine was willing to give up territory before that could happen. So I think a direct meeting between the two at this stage is very unlikely. That being said, both sides being Russia and Ukraine, are really trying to signal to Trump to get him to essentially move more towards their side of the conflict. So they may move towards some kind of an agreement to have a meeting to try to keep Trump on side, but that meeting then actually happening at this stage, I think, would be very difficult.
Yes, Mr. Maximilian, just last question before we let you go. The latest remarks coming in from President Donald Trump, he says that he would be meeting Putin in Russia. What do you make of these remarks? Do you think all of this is merely a gaffe?
Donald Trump is nearly an 80-year-old man. It is often very hard to follow his streams of logic when he speaks. Some of the same issues that he tagged his former opponent, Joe Biden, for. All we've seen from official sources are that the meeting will be held in Alaska, and I think these comments are perhaps more a sign of Trump's age and increasing difficulties in speaking for so long publicly, rather than a change in the agenda.
All right, Mr. Maximilian, that's all the time we had. Point taken. Of course, all eyes will be on that meet that happens in Alaska and also the EU ministers meeting virtually tomorrow. Appreciate you joining us on the broadcast.
Thank you for having me.
In front of a burned down home. It was, their homes were incinerated. They weren't like, even the steel was literally, it was all warped and literally disintegrated because of the winds and the flame and the whole thing, like a blowtorch. They were standing on this beautiful day, maybe a couple of days after. We gave it a little time because what they had suffered. Almost 25,000 homes. And you see what's happening now. They didn't give their permits. I went to a town hall meeting. I said, we're going to get you the federal permits, which are much harder. Almost immediately. Lee Zeldin is a star. He did an incredible job. They have all their federal permits. They don't have their city permits. And the mayor said to me, we think we could have them in 2 years. I was walking down the street, and I met with firemen and police. And I was saying hello to many people that were standing in front of their homes with yellow tape. You can't go in. You can't go onto the lot. And those people wanted to start rebuilding their homes then and there. And the mayor said, we should be able to get them the permits within 2 years. I said, that's a shame. 2 years? Are you kidding? I'm going to get them the federal permit like almost immediately. 2 years. And she roared back, well, maybe 1 year. The place was booing her out of the place. They don't have their permits to build their homes. And now they're talking about putting, this is among the most beautiful areas was in the country. Now they're talking about putting low-income housing there. Can you believe this? I love low-income housing. I made money with low-income housing. I built low-income housing. I know more about low-income housing and luxury housing. I know about everything real estate. They want to replace some of those homes with low-income housing. They haven't gotten their permits yet. We've gotten all the federal permits, which are much tougher to get, and it was done almost immediately through Lee Zeldin and Federal Environmental. And I watched the other day, those people are angry. And now, you know, they had tremendous, they loved that area. They loved the whole big area, different places, but they loved it. It was all luxury stuff and beautiful stuff, and some wasn't that luxury, but the level of love for that neighborhood, their neighborhoods, was incredible. And you know what? I watch people on television, they want to go, they want to leave. They've lost their spirit, they've lost their heart, because the mayor's incompetent. And Gavin Newsom is incompetent. He's got a good line of bullshit, but that's about it. He's incompetent. And you have Los Angeles is, you know, it's amazing. You know, I called, the first thing I did, I got the Olympics to go there. I was the one that got it. And by a rare thing that happened, I'll be the president. I was very upset because I got the Olympics there, and I said I won't be president when it comes. But bad things happened, and illegal things happened, really illegal things happened. Now it turns out one good thing was I'm going to be the president for the Olympics for 2050, for 250, which is going to be fantastic, and also for the World Cup. So we have a lot of good things, and I hope 250 is going to be the 250th anniversary is going to be the best. But when I looked at those people, and I saw last night on television that they still don't have their permits, it's a disgrace what's happened in Australia.
Thank you. The China tariff deadline is tonight. Do you plan to extend that?
We'll see what happens. China's been, we've been dealing very nicely with China, as you probably have heard. They have tremendous tariffs that they're paying to the United States of America. And we'll see what happens. They've been dealing quite nicely. The relationship is very good with President Xi and myself.
President, you mentioned your upcoming meeting with President Putin. Can you tell us what you hope to get out of that and whether you consider inviting President Zelensky to join?
So you have to understand, this is a war that should have never happened. This is a war that wouldn't have happened if I were president. It would have never happened. It was the apple of his eye. I got along very well with President Putin. But if you look, under President Bush, they took a lot of territory. Under President Obama, they took a lot of territory. Under Biden, they essentially took the whole thing. You know, it's just a question of time. Under Trump, you know what they took? Nothing. Nothing. I was the one that said, you can't build your pipeline. That was half built. I came in, I stopped the pipeline. It's called Nord Stream 2. Nobody knows that, you know. Nobody ever heard of Nord Stream 2. You might have not even heard. Biggest pipeline in the world. I stopped it. I was not a friend of Russia, but I got along well with Putin. It's always good to get along with other countries if possible, but that doesn't mean you roll over like Biden did. Biden came in and he immediately approved the pipeline. I couldn't believe it. Then they say Trump wasn't tough on Russia. I wasn't tough. I was the toughest. Putin said, if you're not tough, I would hate like hell to see you visit. I stopped the biggest economic development job, the biggest job that Russia had ever built. I stopped it. It was dead. And this low IQ president came in and he let them build a pipeline and supply oil and gas all over Europe, you know. So this is really a feel-out meeting a little bit. And President Putin invited me to get involved. He wants to get involved. I believe he wants to get it over with. Now, I've said that a few times, and I've been disappointed because I'd have like a great call with him, and then missiles would be lobbed into Kiev or some other place, and you'd have 60 people laying on a road dying. I said, that's cold, that's cold. But it's a violent war. 5,000 to 7,000 people a week are dying. And you know, there's nobody from here. They're all Russian and Ukrainian people, and some people from the cities, much smaller number, but still, those missiles do damage and they kill a lot of people, but mostly soldiers. And they're young soldiers, although in the case of Ukraine, they're getting much older. They're drafting 60-year-olds now. It's a terrible thing to witness, and I think I have an obligation. Look, this is Joe Biden's war. This is not my war. I made a deal with NATO a month ago. You covered it very accurately, actually. We don't pay anything anymore. You know, we're not paying anything. They are buying things from us, and NATO is paying us. I got it raised from 2% of GDP to 5%. And they're paying us for everything that we send. We're not paying. But Biden approved $350 billion. Europe has spent $100 billion. The money that's been spent and the death is incredible. It's the worst thing that's happened, by far the worst that's happened since World War II. So I'm going in to speak to Vladimir Putin. And I'm going to be telling him, you got to end this war. You got to end it. And he wasn't going to mess with me. This war would have never happened. You know, we had a discussion about it one time, and we never had that discussion again. Would have never happened. And when the election was rigged, and then Biden took office, which was barely took office, the auto pen took office, bad things started happening. Bad things, stupid things were said. And it ended up in a war. And you know, and I don't believe this will happen anymore because I have that pretty well covered. This could end up in a third world war. This could have been a third world war. I don't think that's going to happen now. But I thought it was very respectful that the president of Russia is coming to our country as opposed to us going to his country or even a third-party place. But I think we'll have constructive conversations. Then after that meeting, immediately, maybe as I'm flying out, maybe as I'm leaving the room, I'll be calling the European leaders who I get along with very well. And, I have a great relationship, I think, with all of them. And I get along with Zelensky, but, I disagree with what he's done. Very, very severely disagree. This is a war that should have never happened, wouldn't have happened. But I'll be speaking to Zelensky. The next meeting will be with Zelensky and Putin, or Zelensky and Putin and me. I'll be there if they need, but I want to have a meeting set up between the two leaders. I was a little bothered by the fact that Zelensky was saying, well, I have to get constitutional approval. I mean, he's got approval to go into war and kill everybody, but he needs approval to do a land swap because there'll be some land swapping going on. I know that through Russia and through conversations with everybody to the good, for the good of Ukraine. Good stuff, not bad stuff. Also, some bad stuff for both. So there's good and there's bad. But it's very complex because you have lines that are very uneven. And there'll be some swapping. There'll be some changes in land. And the word that they will use is, they make changes. We're going to change the lines, the battle lines. Russia's occupied a big portion of Ukraine. They've occupied some very prime territory. We're going to try and get some of that territory back for Ukraine. But they've taken some very prime territory. They've taken largely ocean, in real estate we call it oceanfront property. That's always the most valuable property. If you're in a lake, a river, or an ocean, it's always the best property. Well, Ukraine, a lot of people don't know that Ukraine was largely 1,000 miles of ocean. That's gone. Other than one small area, Odessa, it's a small area. There's just a little bit of water left. So I'm going to go and see the parameters. Now, I may leave and say, good luck, and that'll be the end. I may say this is not going to be settled. I mean, there are those that believe that Putin wanted all of Ukraine. I happen to be one of them, by the way. I think if it weren't for me, he would not be even talking to anybody else right now. But I'm going to meet with him. We're going to see what the parameters are. I'm then going to call up President Zelensky and the European leaders right after the meeting, yeah. And I'm going to tell them what kind of a deal. I'm not going to make a deal. It's not up to me to make a deal. I think a deal should be made for both. I think Russia has to get back into building their country. It's a massive country. I think they have 11 time zones, if you can believe it. It's a massive, it's by far, from the standpoint of land, it's by far the largest. They have tremendous potential in Russia to do well. They're not doing well. Their economy is not doing well right now because it's been very well disturbed by this. It doesn't help when the President of the United States tells their largest or second largest oil buyer that we're putting a 50% tariff on you if you buy oil from Russia. That was a big blow. And then they say, gee, he wasn't so tough. Nobody else would have done that. And I haven't stopped there. I mean, look, I was all set to do things far bigger than that, but I got a call that they'd like to meet, and I'm going to see what they want to meet about. I'd like to see a ceasefire. I'd like to see the best deal that could be made for both parties. It takes two to tango, right? So ultimately, I'll have a meeting next week. I had a great relationship with him, considering the fact that, I was not nice to him because of the pipeline. I ended the pipeline. I also gave the javelins. Do you ever hear of a javelin? Javelin is called a tank buster. They say that Obama gave them sheets and I gave them javelins. If it weren't for me, all those tanks that were destroyed at the first days of the war because the tanks got stuck in the mud, some commander made a better. They would have been in Kiev in 4 hours going down the highway. But a Russian general made a brilliant decision to go through the farmland instead. And they just had torrential rains, and the rains were so bad, and it was mud, and those tanks got stuck in the mud. I don't know who that general is, but knowing Vladimir, he's probably not around any longer because all those tanks were stuck in the mud, and they went along with the javelins. I gave them the javelins. You know that, right? I gave them javelins. They gave them sheets. But I'm going to I'm going to meet with President Putin, and we're going to see what he has in mind. And if it's a fair deal, I'll reveal it to the European Union leaders and to the NATO leaders, and also to President Zelensky. I think out of respect, I'll call him first, and then I'll call them after. And I may say, lots of luck, keep fighting, or I may say we can make a deal.
If not,
I will tell you this. I've seen a poll coming out of Ukraine. 88% of the people would like to see a deal made. And if you go back 3 years, everybody was gung-ho for war. You know, everybody's gung-ho for war until you have it. It's an amazing thing. I had it with a couple of countries where I couldn't get a deal done with one particular country. And I just couldn't. The guy's great. He's a friend of mine. Great. Good leader. Tough as hell. I couldn't get the deal done. And then he went into war for a short period of time. You know where I'm talking about. First term. And it was nasty. Guys being killed all over the place. And he went through 1 week of war, and I was able to get the deal done. He said, this is nasty. Yes, please.
Yeah, just to follow up on what you were saying there. First of all, Volodymyr Zelensky is not invited on Friday?
He wasn't a part of it. I would say he could go, but he's gone to a lot of meetings. You know, he's been there for 3.5 years. Nothing happened.
And what is the definition?
I mean, do you want somebody that's been doing this for 3.5 years? What's the definition of a good deal? I'll tell you after I hear what the deal is. Because there could be many definitions. You know, you're talking about a very large and complex situation. Now, I tell you, the war that I just settled with Azerbaijan and with, as you know, and Armenia was almost as complex as this one, having to do with routes, trade.
Meeting on Friday with Vladimir Putin.
Well, we're going to have a meeting with Vladimir Putin, and at the end of that meeting, probably in the first 2 minutes, I'll know exactly whether or not a deal can be made.
How will you know that?
Because that's what I do. I make deals. Yeah, please, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to ask you 2 questions, one about China, one about Russia, if I could. On China, your administration agreed to send the most advanced or advanced NVIDIA and AMD chips.
No, obsolete. No.
Obsolete chip. Well, and then 15% of the profits.
You mean the
come back.
20s? No. This is an old chip that China already has. And I deal with Jensen, who's a great guy, and NVIDIA. The chip that we're talking about, the H20, it's an old chip. China already has it in a different form, different name, but they have it. Or they have a combination of two will make up for it, and even then some. Now, Jensen's a very brilliant guy, and Jensen also has a new chip, the Blackwell. Do you know what the Blackwell is? The Blackwell is super duper advanced. I wouldn't make a deal with that, although it's possible I'd make a deal, a somewhat enhanced in a negative way Blackwell. In other words, take 30% to 50% off of it. But that's the latest and the greatest in the world. Nobody has it. They won't have it for 5 years. But the H20 is obsolete. You know, it's one of those things. But it still has a market. So I said, listen, I want 20% if I'm going to approve this for you, for the country, for our country, for the U.S. I don't want it myself. You know, every time I say like 747, I want, yeah, for the Air Force. So I just wanted, so when I say I want 20, I want for the country. I only care about the country. I don't care about myself. And he said, would you make it 15? So we negotiate a little deal. So he's selling a essentially old chip that Huawei has a similar chip, a chip that does the same thing. And I said, good, if I'm going to give it to you, because they have a, they have a stopper, what we call a stopper, not allowed to do it. It's really known as a restrictive covenant. And I said, if I'm going to do that, I want you to pay us as a country something, because I'm giving you a release. I released them only from the H20. Now, on the Blackwell, I think he's coming to see me again about that. But that will be a unenhanced version of the big one. Like, I don't know if you know it, we will sometimes sell fighter jets to a country, and we'll give them 20% less than we have. You know what I mean, right? That's just it.
So on Russia, do you see a time, Mr. President, when there could be normal trade between the U.S. and Russia? Should your meeting go well, should there be peace?
I do, yeah. Russia has a very valuable piece of land. If Vladimir Putin would go toward business instead of toward war, you know, it's a warring nation. That's what they do. They fight a lot of wars. A friend of mine said Russia's tough because they just keep on fighting. They beat Hitler, so did we, and they beat Napoleon. You know, they've been doing this for a long time. I asked a question to a very, very smart man that some people like and some people don't like. Viktor Orban, right, from Hungary, the head of Hungary, and he's in that same area and knows the two countries very well. I said, this was before Biden didn't do anything to get us out of it. He could have gotten us out of that. It would have never happened. I said, so can Russia be beaten by Ukraine? He looked at me like, what a stupid question. He said, Russia's a massive country, and they win their country and they win their life through wars. They fight wars. That's what they do. He said, China beats you with trade. Russia beats you with war. That was a very interesting statement. China's not beating us with trade, not when I'm in charge. But they were beating Biden with trade, but they never beat us with trade. Don't forget, China had to pay $400 billion worth of tariffs when I was last time. That was last time. And if we didn't have COVID, all of this stuff we would be loaded. We're finding hundreds of billions of dollars of cash is pouring into our country now because of tariffs. And all we're doing is we're doing what they do to us. It's so beautiful to see it. They found last month, as you saw, $25 billion of excess cash flow. They say, where did it come from? I said, I'll tell you where it came from. It came from a place called tariffs, and we're doing very well. We're really doing well. But I expect to have a meeting with Putin that I think it'll be good, but it might be bad. And I'm here for one reason, to get rid of a war that somebody else started. Should have never happened. And if I could end it, great. Complex war, a lot of bad blood, But Zelensky's been there for 3.5 years. So if you put him in a room, now I will say this, ultimately I'm going to put the two of them in a room. I'll be there or I won't be there. And I think it'll get solved. Yeah, please be happy.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Excuse me, I'm going to suggest, because do you have any other questions on DC? Because I don't want them to be. Wait. These are incredible people. I don't want them to be standing up here on subjects. Does anybody have a question of them? And then you guys can leave. Okay, a question, Brian, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President. All right.
And by the way, this is only on DC, and then they're going to leave because it's unfair to have them stand up here all day long.
I agree.
Brian.
I've got two questions for you. First, about DC. This is personal for me as well. Last year, I was robbed on the streets by one of these teenage thugs. Had a gun, got away with it. Let's talk about the effort that between law enforcement, prosecutors, and judges, because it's a recycling dump. Like, these kids go, they don't fear the police. They know it. If you talk about how we've got to get these judges and put these kids behind bars, right. Adult crimes deserve adult penalties. And my second question, I'll after you answer that, please.
You want me to answer?
Or whoever wants to take it.
President Trump and President Putin are set to meet in Alaska on August 15th. Trump made the announcement on his Truth Social post and was later confirmed by a Kremlin spokesperson who called the choice of location quite logical. The decision to host the much-anticipated meeting in Alaska has put the spotlight on the U.S. state and its significance for both sides. Now, according to reports, Alaska was chosen as the preferred meeting point due to its proximity to Russia, with the Bering Strait separating the two by around 90 kilometers. The Bering Strait holds significant economic interests for both countries, as it is the gateway to the Arctic, which is rich in minerals. In recent times, both Russia and the United States have ramped up efforts to increase their presence in the Arctic region. The region is not only rich in natural resources, gold, fur, fisheries and petroleum, but also serves as a potential trade gateway to East Asia. Putin's aide, Yuri Ushakov, highlighted Alaska's significance, saying that it is where the economic interests of the two nations intersect, providing prospects for large-scale, mutually beneficial projects. The choice of Alaska as the meeting venue is also notable, given the International Criminal Court's arrest warrant for Putin, which would obligate member states to detain him. However, the U.S. is not a party to the ICC and does not recognize its jurisdiction, meaning no such obligation exists on U.S. soil. The two sides had earlier spoken of Dubai as a venue. Trump had asked Italy to organize a meeting with Putin in Rome or the Vatican. But Italy, as a party to the Rome Statute, is obliged to arrest Putin under the ICC warrant and was reportedly under diplomatic pressure.
Tackling the issue of illegal immigration solely.
We must continue.
Mr. Joachim Bitterlich is a former German ambassador to NATO and former European diplomatic and security advisor to German Chancellor Helmut Kohl. He is now joining us live from Normandy, France. Mr. Bitterlich, thank you very much for making time for us and welcome to WION World is One. Good to see you. What do you make of this plan for a meeting between President Putin and President Trump in Alaska?
Well, Alaska as the meeting point between Trump and Putin sounds strange at first sight, but you have given before the main reasons why Americans and Russians have been agreeing on Alaska. There is not the problem on the International Criminal Court, the ICC. It's at the same time Alaska is the border, a maritime border between Russia and the US. And let's say it's a zone of common economic interests in that area that will develop further, I'm sure, in the coming years. Therefore, let's take it as it is. It's not as, let's say, strange as many people have been thinking in the beginning.
Mr. Bitterlich, what do you make of this new tactic being used by President Trump? Because he did say that for us to end the war in Ukraine, let's start with Ukraine, I need some minerals from you. Now it seems like after his meeting with Putin, if it's going to happen, then again, another minerals deal is in the offing. What do you think?
Let's wait and see. With Trump, you never know what's the real intention behind. You don't see clearly what he will really to get out of it. At least it will be, in my eyes, a first meeting, not, let's say, the meeting of a final solution, as the Ukrainians are, up till now at least, as we see, not part of this meeting. And therefore, they will need, let's say, a second time to see what will be the reactions, the reflections of the Ukrainians, and let's say Europeans, don't underestimate them, towards any, let's say, peace settlement proposed by Trump and Putin. Therefore, it will be, I hope, at least a first step towards a ceasefire, towards a Pacific solution of this conflict in Europe. Let's wait and see, but I'm not sure whether Trump would like to propose another minerals deals with Russia.
Okay.
It's an interesting aspect, yes, I quite agree, but I do not see the real need on this. When you look at the...
Mr. Bitterlich, I'm sorry to cut you short. I'm sorry to cut you short, but we've run out of time.
Well, Trump appeared to slip up twice at the White House conference when speaking about the summit with Russia, slated with the Russian President Vladimir Putin in Alaska later this week. And if reports are anything to go by, it could also turn out that Trump may visit Russia briefly after meeting with the Russian counterpart in Alaska, because this is exactly what Trump said. Was it a slip-up or was it intentional? Speaking at a news conference announcing a public safety emergency in Washington, President Trump said And he said this twice, that he would be traveling to Russia to meet with Vladimir Putin. Listen for yourselves.
This is an emergency. This is a tragic emergency. And it's embarrassing for me to be up here. You know, I'm going to see Putin. I'm going to Russia on Friday. I don't like being up here talking about how unsafe and how dirty and disgusting this once beautiful capital was. Going to Russia, that's going to be a big deal. What happens, happens. I'll let you know what happens. You'll be the first to know. I'll be calling the European leaders.
Now, while this could be a gaffe, reports suggest that Trump could briefly cross into Russia after meeting Putin in Alaska on Friday. If this actually happens, Trump's brief stop in Russian territory could resemble the scene during the 2019 Korea's United States DMZ summit. In 2019, this is what had happened. Trump met North Korean leader Kim Jong-un at the demarcation line between North and South Korea. The two men shook hands, with Kim saying that he had never expected to meet the president at that place. Trump then crossed over into North Korea, becoming the first US president to do so. Now, if Trump enters Russian soil, it could become a defining moment in US-Russia relations and reshape the landscape of American diplomacy and the Russia-Ukraine war. And of course, there is more on this from our correspondent Susan Tehrani, who sends us this report.
During a press conference on Monday, President Trump said he was going to Russia to meet with Vladimir Putin. While it has been confirmed that the two will meet in Alaska on Friday, it was a curious comment, many brushing it off as a gaffe. But what if Trump's "I'm going to Russia" line wasn't a gaffe at all, but a deliberate breadcrumb? Sources tell some White House reporters that plans may be in motion for Trump to briefly cross into Russia after meeting Putin in Alaska, a scene echoing his 2019 DMZ walk with Kim Jong-un. If true, it would be a made-for-TV moment designed to jolt the news cycle and dominate headlines. In that light, the so-called fumble might not have been a slip, but part of the script. But beyond the optics, this meeting could mark a pivotal moment in U.S.-Russia relations, signaling a shift in posture, testing international alliances, and potentially redrawing the boundaries of American diplomacy in the middle of an ongoing war in Ukraine. Susan Tehrani reporting from New York for WION World is One.
U.S. President Donald Trump, in a press conference on Monday, described his upcoming meet with his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin as a feel-out meeting to gauge Putin's ideas for ending the war in Ukraine. Trump has invited Putin to Alaska on Friday, 15th of August, which will mark the first face-to-face meeting between the two presidents since Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. Now, at this press conference, the U.S. president said that he would press his Russian counterpart to end the war.
So I'm going in to speak to Vladimir Putin, and I'm going to be telling him, you got to end this war, you got to end it.
Trump also said that he was a little bothered by his Ukrainian counterpart Zelensky's stance and insisted that both Ukraine and Russia would have to give up territory to each other as part of a potential peace agreement, adding that his meeting with Putin would test waters for such a deal.
I'm going to meet with him. We're going to see what the parameters are. I'm then going to call up President Zelensky and the European leaders right after the meeting, yeah. And I'm going to tell them what kind of a deal. I'm not going to make a deal. It's not up to me to make a deal.
Trump said that he would know within minutes if there would be a peace deal between Ukraine and Russia when he meets Putin later in the week.
At the end of that meeting, probably in the first 2 minutes, I'll know exactly whether or not a deal can be made. Because that's what I do. I make deals.
He also revealed plans to call Zelensky and other European leaders immediately after the talks, and fearing that Putin will team up with Trump to force unacceptable compromises, European leaders plan to speak separately on Wednesday. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz has invited the French, British and other European leaders and the EU and NATO chiefs to virtual talks. Merz's office said the video conference in various rounds of talks would discuss further options to exert pressure on Russia, and this is in preparation of possible peace negotiations and related issues of territorial claims and security. Now, EU foreign ministers met in Brussels on Monday with Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha and also examined imposing a 19th package of sanctions on Russia since the invasion. EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas said that until Russia agrees to a full and unconditional ceasefire, concessions should not even be discussed. Zelensky warned against giving in to Putin's demands, highlighting how Russia refuses to stop the killings and therefore must not receive any rewards or benefit. And earlier in the day, I spoke with Professor James A. Russell, Associate Professor at the Department of National Security Affairs in the Naval Postgraduate School. Listen in to what he has to say on this evolving matter.
Well, I would... all we can do is hope that he's right, that Putin is going to show up with concessions. But frankly, I just don't see it. But I beg to be... I stand to be corrected. I hope that Putin does in fact show up prepared to show flexibility to get some kind of ceasefire and then a peace agreement in place. But I guess I'm skeptical about this. And President Trump himself has been all over the map in terms of the various positions he's taken vis-a-vis the Europeans, vis-a-vis the Ukrainians. It's not clear to me, for example, how you can have any kind of negotiation or serious discussion on a ceasefire or peace agreement in Ukraine without the participation of the Ukrainians and the Europeans.
Staying on with updates from the U.S., President Donald Trump, in a press conference on Monday, described his upcoming meeting with his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin, as a feel-out meeting to gauge Putin's ideas for ending the war in Ukraine. Now, Trump has invited Putin to Alaska on Friday, that is the 15th of August, which will mark the first face-to-face meeting between the two presidents since Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February of 2022. Now, at the press conference, the U.S. president said that he would press his Russian counterpart to end the war.
So I'm going in to speak to Vladimir Putin, and I'm going to be telling him, you got to end this war, you got to end it.
Trump also said that he was a little bothered by his Ukrainian counterpart Zelensky's stance and insisted that both Ukraine and Russia would have to give up territory to each other as part of a potential peace agreement, adding that his meeting with Putin would test waters for such a deal.
I'm going to meet with him. We're going to see what the parameters are. I'm then going to call up President Zelensky and the European leaders right after the meeting, yeah. And I'm going to tell them what kind of a deal. I'm not going to make a deal. It's not up to me to make a deal.
Trump said he would know within minutes of that meeting if there would be a peace deal between Ukraine and Russia.
That meeting, probably in the first 2 minutes, I'll know exactly whether or not a deal can be made. Because that's what I do. I make deals.
He also revealed plans to call Zelensky and other European leaders immediately after the talks, fearing that Putin will team up with Trump to force unacceptable compromises. European leaders plan to speak separately on Wednesday. Now, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz has invited the French, British and other European leaders and the EU and NATO chiefs to virtual talks. Merz's office said the video conference in various rounds of talks would discuss further options to exert pressure on Russia and the preparation of a possible peace negotiation and related issues of territorial claims and security. EU foreign ministers met in Brussels on Monday with Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha and also examined imposing a 19th package of sanctions on Russia since the invasion in 2022. EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas and she said that until Russia agrees to a full and unconditional ceasefire, concessions should not be even discussed. Zelensky warned against giving in to Putin's demands, highlighting how Russia refuses to stop the killings and therefore must not receive any rewards or benefits. And there is more on this from our correspondent Susan, who sends us this report from New York.
House press briefing on Monday, President Donald Trump said that achieving peace in Ukraine requires land swapping between Russia and Ukraine, potentially involving territory that each side cedes, which he described as both good and bad. Trump emphasized that Russia occupies very prime territory and expressed the desire to recover some of it for Ukraine. He framed an upcoming Alaska summit with Putin as a quote-unquote feel-out meeting, stating that he'd immediately consult with European leaders and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky afterwards. Trump suggested that if conditions are favorable, a future three-way meeting between him, Zelensky, and Putin could follow. European leaders and Volodymyr Zelensky have firmly rejected a deal that would exclude Ukraine or forces territorial concessions in any way. Susan Tehrani reporting from New York for WION World This Way.
Now, Russia continues to seize ground in Ukraine, pounding defenders into retreat and raising alarm across Kiev and European capitals. President Donald Trump prepares to host Vladimir Putin on U.S. soil, hoping for a constructive conversation. He calls out Zelensky for ruling out territorial concessions. While Europe feels left out, Trump assures calling European leaders after the high-stakes Alaska summit on Friday. Now, here's a report for more details.
Russia's offensive is relentless. Towns fall, front lines vanish, and the thunder of artillery drowns hopes of reprieve. Beyond the front lines, Ukrainian cities also bear the brunt of a relentless Russian aerial barrage. Missiles, drones, and glide bombs rain death and destruction from the skies. As Moscow gains territory, Ukraine pushes back, its long-range drone strikes now striking deep inside Russia, aiming to disrupt supply chains and production hubs. Clearly, no side is holding it back. With the war grinding on, a major diplomatic move with a promise to halt the bloodshed. The icy cold land of Alaska, which is holding one of the most anticipated meetings in recent times. Donald Trump is poised to sit down with Putin alone. It would be a litmus test for the US president. A war he promised to end in a day continues to grind on as he completes 200 days in office.